So hello everyone, and welcome to the first session of The Commons Equal X, Inventing the Non-Given Commons, taught by Anne-Françoise Schmid, Joevenn and Tony Yanick. I will be your moderator for this seminar, so please feel free to approach me should you have any queries about logistics and stuff like that. I'll do a short introduction of the seminar by reading the synopsis, and then a very short biography of Anne-Françoise, and then I'll pass the mic for you guys to introduce yourself, and for also every researcher at the new center to introduce themselves. So the seminar focuses on understanding the non-given form of the commons. We will posit that this common equal X. The common equal X will not be given, but would be constructed from the heterogeneity of our knowledges. This is therefore a seminar in invention, philosophical and non-philosophical. We will look for an X in contemporary art, in ethics, in the sciences, in mysticism, and we will do this especially through the lens of impossibilities. It is within the designation of the impossible that these domains of thought find their epistemic limitations. Our task will be to transform these philosophical, mathematical, etc. impossibilities in order to use them to treat the problems of our actual world. We will call this the rethinking of integrative objects. At the practical level, this seminar will use practice-based workshops to explore and develop new languages and methodologies, new names and forms, and work through concepts pertaining to the unknown and the impossible. The workshops will create new ways of thinking and seeing beyond theory and practice, which leaves room for both contingency and experimentation in developing the situated knowledge that will be indigenous to all working groups. This will open up practices for translation and application as methodologies in dealing with not given forms of the commons, and our impossibilities as conduits for inventing non-given commons. At the theoretical level, through these workshops and seminars, we aim to develop a new use conception of language. This language will not be conceptually isolated, i.e. as gramma-text, but rather one that possesses an idea of forcing and a transformation of metaphoras, i.e. tele-phore, leading to a mutation and operative use of language. We will thus not develop a language for language's sake. We will start from invention, which is often understood mono-disciplinarily in philosophy, art, science, etc. We will, however, broaden the subject by adding fiction as a distinguished operator to our domain of invention. We explore how fiction prepares for the diversification of various disciplines, and finally, how creation touches more closely the forms of reality, being indifferent to disciplines while making use of them. So Anne-Françoise Schmid, philosopher and epistemologist among scientists and artists, specialist of philosophy of mathematics on Poincaré, as initiator of generic space in sciences, editor of Russell and Coutura. She has clarified the general assumption of epistemology in a manner to avoid the exclusion of contemporary methods under the effect of old paradigms. Similarly, in philosophy, she constructs a generic space for combining concepts of various philosophies, creating new style with philosophy, not just with one. She has taught at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, at the University of Geneva, at the University of Paris ou Nanterre, at the National Institute of Applied Sciences of Lyon. She collaborated with the National Institute of Agronomic Research. She is now associate researcher at the Chair of Theory and Methods of Innovative Design, MINS Paris Tech, as well as in the Poincaré archives. So with this, I'd love to pass the mic to Anne-Françoise, and then to Tony and to Joevenn to say perhaps a couple of words on how this seminar will run. And then if you feel so inclined, perhaps we can pass the mic around to everyone in the classroom so that everyone can introduce themselves briefly.
Thank you, Martina. It's very gentle to present me. We are for the common equal x, we are 3. I think it is better because the common is not a common for one person. With 3, we can construct a network to, as near Tony, a network to construct a common. We will first introduce our group, and Tony will introduce this group. And after, we will present to Tony and Joe. Tony, please.
Thank you. Just really quickly, because since we kind of we did a lot of introduction, different than what we'd already planned. But this group has been going on for maybe 5 to 6 years, at least from when I was involved, without a name. This is a shout out to Alice as well, as Rakab, because she's worked a lot with Anne-Françoise Schmid and with me and former courses. So we have, our group is called the Interdisciplinary Group of Collective Intimacy. It's an open group, and we hope that many people will join and can participate with us. Right now, we've been doing these courses. In the future, we're hoping, the near future, we're hoping to sort of isolate more of a platform and to have more of an expanse. But for now, this is our output and our research. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that. So I'll pass it back to Anne-Françoise, and we can begin the. Oh no, we have to do the students or anybody else that wants to introduce themselves.
First, you and Joe to present.
Joevenn as well.
Hi. Thanks for having all of us. This group of collectivity is not just limited to the 3 of us, but we take it as a working hypothesis that everybody in this class right now is a part of the collective. This is the work that we are all going to be doing together as a collective. And this is important for theoretical and methodological reasons that we're going to go about today, because today's class is about the commons equals X. So, yeah.
I add
introductions. Sorry.
Yes, I add that Joe finish a master on philosophies without foundations. It is very interesting. So. And in his master, he shows that the foundation, if they are not philosophical, can be mathematical, scientific, with other order of thinking as philosophy. So it is an important device for interdisciplinarity.
I think this will be a premise of how we can all contribute to what collectivity means through, if you're an artist, etc., etc. So I think we should start. I think everybody here should introduce themselves to us, to each other. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure the order. If you don't want to speak, you don't have to. It really helps if you can at least tell us a little bit about your background. So because we work very interdisciplinary, we want to be able to work in where you are coming from. So we have 2 Marias. Maria K, can you say where you're coming from, what your background is, just very briefly? Or chat too, is fine.
Yes. Our values, the values of our group. The values we share are those which allow a dynamic development between philosophies, arts, science, and mystics, and put them in relationships that do not depend on a passage from one discipline to another. Being interdisciplinary does not mean moving from one discipline to another. except in very local and ephemeral conditions. In any case, the interdisciplinary exercise of each individual are limited. We are looking for a way to move forward an invent that does not depend on moving from one discipline to another. We put into practice a generic process that allows us to configure a space of invention that does not ignore disciplines, but does not depend on them. The questions of independence and inseparability are thus almost ethical values, those which allow orchestrations that no discipline on its own can constitute. One of our core values is therefore the orchestration of our various methods. The generic space hypothesis dramatically alters the discussions of values, such as valuations, transvaluations, hierarchies, appearance and disappearance, as in Twilling of the idols. Independence makes us pose the hypothesis of a real equal X, which is not the product of our knowledge, but which precedes it. We cannot use the generics without an X point of exteriority, whether in the local character of the research or in its very principle, which refers to a real equal X. Our values have been developed in a book on future sciences. Can you see?
Yep.
Manual for future science. It is véritablement un manuel. Generic Epistemology, Manual for Future Science, where Muriel Mombrini-Doudet, as biologist, and I, as philosopher, base their research on two principles: the principles of non-exclusion and that of generosity. The principle of non-exclusion guarantees that we do not exclude a philosophy in the name of the supremacy of one of them, nor a scientific method in the name of past paradigms, nor a poacher according to the fashion of one of them. The principle of generosity opens us openness to other sciences, mysticism, and philosophies without a particular rule regulating this openness. But it can only work if we treat the common like an impossible to fully disclose. If the common is given, it will just be a consensus between like-minded people, but it's those of white supremacists or fascists. We must keep an element of the unknown in the common so that they can participate in an orchestration that is not a war with humans. So a real X, a point of exteriority X, an open multiplicity of disciplines, two principles and a possibility of orchestration by superpositions, inseparability and interdependence, by construction of a machine for combining discipline with the generic, an approach to language that does not close in on itself any more than an equation or a painting does not close it in on itself. There are our values, those which make it possible to undo and recompose the mixed elements of our world and to show new ways to deal with them. But for that, we must change our outlook, understand that of others in our own. For us, the difference between commons equal X and values is that values is constituent of the architectonic of the thinking, common thinking. Common are what is the focus of this course. We have to construct it all together. There are the value. Principle of generosity. The source is first Descartes with his theory of time, who is not continue, and the bridge between one moment to another is generosity. Descartes is the philosopher of generosity. And non-exclusion is important because in France, for the climate change, the opposant to the climate change were the scientist who does not accept models and modelization as scientific device. It was very interesting. They have an idea of science from the 80th siècle, of the 18th siècle. And now, to see what is science now, we have now to start from given paradigms. It is the same for philosophy, because philosophy is a tradition, and we cannot see who are now the philosophers. Because in the tradition, no one thing or word talk who are the new philosophers. Nietzsche said this. Who are I see the new philosophers. Back. So these two principles and inseparability and the independence are in our architectonic. I think now it is interesting that the students present themselves. If
I can call on people to present themselves. Carl, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so obviously my name is Carl, and I'm doing a PhD in human geography at Newcastle University. Geography is a discipline that is already trying to figure out what happens in space, and so as to navigate the world without knowing very much about it, presumably. And what I'm doing is basically trying to figure out how this works under conditions of what we might take to be ontological insecurity, or sort of when our relationship to ourselves break down, such as in certain forms of severe psychopathology. And yeah, please call the next person. Thank you. Nice to meet you all, by the way.
Thank you.
How about we go by the names? Carl, and we have Casio, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Casio. I'm doing my master's now in philosophy, and my theoretical background, well, in graduation, my graduation thesis was about how to access and transform ways of seeing through the concept of aesthetic judgment in Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein's lectures on aesthetics.
Mhm.
And this theme persisted in my research. Now I'm researching the systematic critique of transcendental structures performed by Reza Negarestani in his Intelligence and Spirits. And well, I think something that has, I think it has something in common with the themes and the subject matter of the seminar. And as an aesthetic background, I'm involved with noise and experimental music, black metal production. So I think it will be very interesting. Thank you.
Very good.
Vincent, do you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my name is Vincent Ardidon. You can call me Vincent. I'm a writer from Manila. So I did my BA in language and literature from the University of the Philippines. And right now, my current interests and practice circuits on poetics, theory, queer materialism, media and technology, but also philosophy of post-nature. So that's about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you know Raya Martin?
Yes.
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 The filmmaker.
We collaborate.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
It's great. Yes, yes.
Yeah, we know each other.
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
very good. Very good.
Okay. So Maria Koleva, do you want to introduce? Koleva?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm not critic, and I have an ongoing argument with artistic collectives that say that they can't perform the utopia. And I say to them, how can you perform what is unsayable, basically? The boundary must lie in some other places. And there is art historian conflict as well, because Joseph Beuys also claimed to have performed Utopia, but he was called fascist because of that, because he was claiming to make politics into art. And I want to establish the boundaries, discover what is the truth in this conflict, and maybe someone will convince me that I'm wrong.
I think this is the course that you would be interested in, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is a type of boundary shifting problematic of utopia.
Slight change in it, yeah. Maria Silk. I'm gonna pronounce everybody's name wrong, so I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's okay. Yeah, hi.
Hello.
So my background is a lot of New Center. I like to take seminars here, but more farther away is art, fine art. And right now I actually have a specific project that I'm working on it's definitely outside of academia. It's partly a business, but it's also dealing with New Age spirituality, which is something that I'm very interested in. And I'm also interested in popular spirituality and thinking about it in terms of a generic space. So I'm interested in what are the criteria for generic space and invention within kind of the field at large, outside of academia, but also within. So.
Thank you. Raphael, do you mind?
Yes, there are
Yeah.
others.
Hello.
My name is Rafael Lima, and I'm from Brazil, Brasilia, and I'm a bachelor in social science. I've been doing some independent research on animism and cosmotechniques, and I have some interest in network protocols, in Web3, in open knowledge, and I think it's interesting space for sharing some thoughts on cultural commons. And there is this similarity, I think, in the concept. I think that protocols and other means of like it is quite wide. It's politics, like it goes to biotechniques and culture, and so computer networks. So it will be interesting to brainstorm here with all of you. Thank you.
I'm a multidisciplinary person. I haven't really introduced myself, but I was a computer science. I'm computer science and computer engineer. I've done a lot with protocol stuff and a similar vein. Before Cosmotechnics stuff came out with Yokuya, but more like Galloway stuff. But so would be interested in talking more about that. Georgia.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I'm Georgia Scartado. I'm from Greece. I have graduated from architecture and then I did my master's in digital arts. So right now I'm working with computational tools about computational realities, and I'm very interested in world building at the cross section between fiction and computation. And I'm also very interested around this seminar about the whole inventing new languages, forms, and concepts and stuff. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody? We have Sadia. Sadia?
Hi, hello.
Hi.
My name is Saida, and I'm doing my PhD in art history in University of Wisconsin-Madison. My dissertation topic is decolonializing the information aesthetic, and I focus on the Middle East both geographically and epistemologically. So the main question that I'm dealing with is that how like other alternative local episteme would help us to possibly expand the notion of information technology and also information technology. And I think that's it for now, but I hope that through the course of this class we get some time to discuss our research and questions and possibly to get some feedbacks from you all. And it's so nice to meet you and hear about your research and questions. They're very interesting.
Thank you. Just to answer quickly, this course is meant to, we have 2 months. We were going to do, maybe they will continue, but this course is meant for everybody kind of, if they would like to come in with their project, and we'll be workshopping the project. So we want to, everybody should get to know at some level everybody else's project with different aspects of how we're building the concepts. So you'll actually be contributing to inventing this course, because we don't know what the impossible is or what the common is. Everybody has a different understanding. And this kind of practice we're trying to build. So it'll be an experiment. We'll see how it goes. Frederick?
Hi, how are you? My name is Frederick. I'm from Venezuela. My background is literature, and the tutor of my thesis was Eric del Búfalo, which is a Laruelle student. Yeah.
I know Unai very well, Eric.
Yeah, that's why I love Laruelle.
I know. Yes,
Tons of his texts, and I always felt inspiration to get like poetics for non-standard philosophy, but more oriented to literature and experimental texts in literature, mixing Laruelle's structure with examples in literature like Samuel Beckett or Maurice Blanchot.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Malu?
Hi, I'm from Brazil too, but I live in London and I'm in my BA of Arts, finishing it at the moment. I think my dissertation is going to be something about complex systems in art. And yeah, I just want to hear more what everyone's going on about.
Thank you. We have a second Anne-Françoise Schmid. I don't know who is on the other, on Anne-Françoise Schmid's other account, but if you want to introduce yourself. You might be muted. Maybe not. Yeah, you're muted. Yeah, there we go.
Voila.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Ivan or Ivan, and I was invited by Anne-Françoise Schmid to take part in the course. That's why I use her name here. I'm both an artist and a graphic designer, and I met Anne-Françoise Schmid last year and in Paris, and we've been working together since then. And this year we wrote kind of a little experimental book together. And that's why she invited me, because she thought, I think the course has a lot to do with what we did together. So I'm very happy to meet you guys and to be able to take part in this.
So you're actually essentially a part of the collective. So just like we, you know, it's very heterogeneous. It all goes through and from. No, it's not heterogeneous. I mean, it's a hierarchical, but but yeah. So we meet through her. So this is my first time meeting you, but nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine. So I have an academic background in philosophy. I did my bachelor's degree as a philosophy major, and I also was heavily involved in critical theory. So I ended up doing a thesis on theories of ideology broadly, but specifically on Althusser. And these days I work more in the arts. And so I'm an exhibition manager, but I also work right now as a freelance researcher, and I'm particularly involved researching certain conceptual artists. I work a lot right now on Felix Gonzalez Torres. So he does a lot of non-object-based practices and kind of disrupts a lot of typical paradigms of the art market and so on. But I maintain an interest in philosophy, and particularly in Laruelle. I came across his work first in the book Photo Fiction, so I'm quite interested in the aesthetic aspects of his work, and in general, I'm just eager to work with it in a more rigorous way. Thanks.
Very good.
Very nice. Alex?
Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. My name is Alex. Any and all gender pronouns are fine. And I'm tuning in from California. I'm not currently in school, but my academic background is in architectural theory and media studies. Currently, my primary artistic collaboration is pretty intensely interdisciplinary, which I'm now considering and reconsidering in light of the text we read for today. But our research focuses generally on global systems of capital, built environment, but we're also thinking through human and non-human ontologies and machinic sensoria that we through writing, sound, and performance. That's for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. I don't know which one's Joevenn called. Dana, did you already? No. Yes.
Hey, I'm Dana. I have an academic background in 20th century German art and media studies. Of late, I'm leaning towards I'm leaning towards interest in critical posthumanism, and particularly how that can be.
We cannot hear more.
Can you hear me at all?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, no, yep.
Interested in critical posthumanism, enactment and language. I am generally interested in poetics and write a lot of poetry and make visual art.
Joe? Maybe if you're not there, it's okay.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm tuning in from Berlin, Germany, and I have a background in visual communication, and I wrote my thesis about Yannick's theory of the minor aesthetic categories, the cute, the zany, and the interesting, which to her are like an index for social modes of organization of late capitalist societies, whereas the cute stands for consumption and the interesting for circulation and the zany for labor, which I applied onto immaterial modes of production with a focus on like platform capitalism and Instagram. And I'd like to deepen my research in aesthetic theory and apply that onto online means of online communication via visual content. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Did we do the whole roll call now? Is that everybody doing? Nobody else? No, Cormac. Oh, Cormac. Yeah, sorry. Yes. What?
Sorry, my internet's kind of shaky, so I've muted my video.
Fine.
That's cool.
I'm Kamongi Njoe. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. A writer, a poet. Yeah, I'm interested in Black radical studies and traditions in sonics and poetry as well. Yeah, it's nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
We have a good representation of geography here in the continents. We're missing a few, but it's pretty nice. It's a pretty good spread. So I think it would be very interesting to even spend the time just defining what is common. But I think Joevenn and I have quickly we have just a little bit to say about why we're involved in this project, and then I think we're going to move to more of a discussion and like a practice. So, Joevenn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, but is Anne-Françoise gonna go? You should read about the common equals X first.
Very true. Sorry.
No.
On the common equal X?
Yeah, I think if that's...
Yes. The common equal X is an intermediate field between the generic and the disciplines. No discipline in isolation can describe it. It presupposes disciplines, knowledge clusters, but cannot be reduced to them. It's more concrete than the generic space, but still as something non-perceptible and non-intuitive. We noun common, too well known, Nietzsche would say, give rise to all possible identifications, whether they are those of ethnic groups or of fascist position. It is therefore not a question of sociological or anthropological research of the commons, but on the contrary, of an experience of the commons, not of political or social subjects, but of humans. Humans and subjects are not the same. This can inspire political or social commons. The commons equal X are the concrete forms of the immense field of intermediaries between knowledge, learned and inducts, and the generic. They can manifest the generic, which is never given other than through a process. The common equal X takes its value thanks to an axiom of implantation. There is something of X which, in the last instance, is in relation without relation to the real. The unrelated is not only a question of pedantic language, but manifests a leap without intermediaries between the heterogeneous planes of the commons equal X. This can be called abduction, leap, change of scale and of nature, which suppose a virtual reality of passive synthesis, which make it possible to form new common equal X. There is no commons equal X without passive synthesis, which gives a kind of membrane to the commons. The common equal X can be approached by paying attention to the intentions and postures of researchers and engineers. We can then create matrices between these postures and intentions and the character of the objects X. The matrices make it possible to find completely unexpected mixtures between posture and object, which allows us to model them differently by attributing human characters to them. Science and engineering is becoming more human in a way that the classical science did not know, where a man was just the actor and the sorcerer apprentice, as they say. There we bring the human back to science, we hope, for science inhabited by humans rather than by social and political subjects. The common equal X can be created from a material transformed by operators, fiction, virtual, future. It then appears as an heterogeneous set of extensions. For example, Mars soil survey machines are treated by their creator as collective geologists, which alters the machine's vision. See the movies Avatar, made in connection with the relevant NASA laboratory. The avatar of a geologist, yes, we suspected, but collective brings a new value which leads to an introduction of collective intimacy in science and engineering. There needs to be some communality equal X, because nothing happens in pure isolation. But each common equal X is contingent. It can be modified, abandoned, rediscovered. Contingency is a force. It allows creation independently of the theories, but without forgetting them. It makes it possible to create a whole field with its feelings, its voice, its vast lands, which allow new passive synthesis. Our obligation is to orchestrate in a way that is favorable to human, not just to subjects.
I was supposed to set up what we're going to get into, which is the common equals X, but I'll do it right now. So yeah, Anne-Françoise, the premise of what we're doing as a group, as a collective, which by that I mean all of us in this room, in this Zoom, we're questioning the entire course. We're questioning the problematic, or not the, problematic in an open sense, the problematic of collectivity without a foundation, without a given common, without a given foundation. So we're talking about the non-given commons. And so we're talking about collectivity in this instance. We're questioning how is it possible to construct a collectivity in such a method, in such a manner. And why this is important, as in Anne-Françoise's speech she tries to get into, why this is important for our seminar is that we are presupposing that collectivity is not just, we are presupposing that collectivity has an intrinsic value of truth, for instance, that cannot be excluded. It's not a supplement. It's in fact an intrinsic or integral aspect of truth making. We could put it like that. And in this integral aspect of truth making, collectivity, or finding out what a non-given commons is, allows us to view relations of alterity, for instance, or relations to alterity. How do we relate to other disciplines? How do we relate to other avenues of thought, etc.? All of these need to be recognized as truth forming, and not just supplementary. And so in a sense, the question of, like, for instance, in the question of the in itself, is we keep talking about whether there's anything that's in itself. We're trying to figure out what truth is. If we try to equate truth with in itself, we're trying to figure out if there's an open, multi-layered aspect of n-dimensional truth making, if what that entails, etc. So that's like a prelude and a precursor into collectivity that, yeah. Tony, do you want to?
Sure. So just give me one moment here. Yeah, it works. Okay. So I briefly, I'm going to just kind of try to keep going, and it'll be like a little bit of a wrap up, a little bit. So hopefully it'll help make a little bit of sense for everybody. But so here I'm just, this is our formula, right? The common equals X. We're using this functional formula, right? Because when we discuss our work, it's always about operators. So things have a slight change when we're talking about how things work in operation. So this is the function of the X here is the impossibility, which is the unknown. Now I'll try to explain a little bit why. Right. So we know. I'm just going to go over. This is my not all three of us. The three of us have to kind of collate all of our different perspectives together. But the common's not a matter of substance, right? So these are like formal past versions of the common, what they dealt with, how they kind of handled collectivity and common. But now we're in a hyper-individualized world, right? And we're still an extremely important discussion, especially with identitarian politics necessarily coming and taking over certain debates. But how do we have, so one of the things we want to present is that the common is not necessarily a universal equal, right? That there is a heterogeneity to our function of the common. So, right. So it's constantly escaping definition. And this is why its actual existence is impossible. If you try to include all things that are common, you're going to end up at the boundary, or you'll always be at the boundary. But this boundary crossing thing might actually be able to enable us to work towards something, or going towards beyond a limit of what we can understand, right? So repetition of our hypothesis. but it's an impossibility, but still an imperative. So it's still necessary that we think about it and that we still attain for it. This kind of goes, I think, to what Maria was talking about with utopia, right? The utopia is also, in a sense, an impossibility, but also an imperative, something that we must strive towards. And this imperative seems to be this the argument you might be having. It's like whether the imperative is from one perspective, maybe it's kind of, we can discuss the performativity in these terms, right? So this is the essential paradox of. I'm going to just use an example here of community. Like one form of common is community here, and if you try to think of community, right, the paradox is that it must precede itself in order to be constituted. Like there must be some form of common in order to form a community, right? The problem is that there is no fixed ground, no a priori. So this is what Joevenn was talking about when he was discussing the non-given, right, or the on-ground. There's no ground to such a discussion. Yeah, so rather than defining it, we can spend all day defining it. We could say it's ontological, it has a substance, there's an essential characteristic to it, there's a universal, whatever we may want to do it. We can define it for hours, and I'll provide you a document that I did, which is just notes of definitions throughout history, which is, you'll see, just like you'll define and define and define. But also it's this empty space, right? And this is something like Derrida took into when he was talking about home and the gift, and also Levinus, and a few others. But anyways, so we want to actually change this understanding of this empty or this lack, right? And I'll get to this, but so always understanding this in what is not common, what is, there's an empty form involved, right?
Yes, with Tony, we wrote a paper, the dispersible delta no. It's an interpretation of the no. Voilà.
Yes, so reiteration, dispersible no. Delta no. So yeah, what the delta no was, this is the paper that Anne-Françoise and I worked on. It's the idea that things, I'm going to say it very briefly and very simple, but if in the complex world that we live in, right, no one discipline, no one perspective can take authority over an object. And in the past, our sciences have been kind of evolving through analytics and then through into synthetics. And you get this with the what everybody, the Hegelian triangle, right? That you have a thesis and antithesis, right? And then the synthesis. So you have two opposites or two tension, and then you can synthesize them to come to terms with a third. The critique that Anne-Françoise is making in a lot of her work, and what we took to read into this, is that there's no ability to do this anymore. There is no synthesis. It always will fail, or always will have a blind spot to it, right? There'll always be something outside. There's no totality. And so that's what we try to present with this delta no. And that's the poetic way that Anne-Françoise says it is that it's the subtle rain of the no. A very subtle rain. Something that you can stand outside, it's kind of nice, it feels good. It's subtle rain. It's not completely imposing, right? So it's a resistance, right? But also there's an affirmation to it. And you'll find that this is like a thematic to a lot of the positions that we like to take. It's a position, I would say, that's against critique, or beyond critique, I would say, because we do critique things, like we will give opinions, right? But the formal methodology of critique, right, which is assuming that you're a contradiction and you have to kind of resolve the contradiction. This we're looking beyond. We try to practice beyond it. So I'm just going to have a few more slides. I wanted to get things in writing just because I know 3 of us are talking. And there's a lot of like concepts that we're bringing in, and I can provide you the slides so you can start to think of our words, all right? So when we talk about creation, we talk about invention, we talk about these 2 kinds of concepts, right? And the invention is something that, the distinction I can get to later, but for now, invention. The way that we want to set up the second half of this course, right, the impossible side of the course, is we have to treat this as an active temporal operator, right? So it's a mode of inclusion and exclusion. It's a point of drawing a line or drawing a boundary, right? That's sort of like what is impossible at the time. That's like the simplest way of thinking of what is included as what is possible, what is excluded as impossible. You can think of this in different scales and different dimensions, and I think that we'll do this in next week. Right, but this is what I wanted to say is what is common is not necessarily what unites us and what is common to us all. Many of these things will exist and consist in perpetual tension. That's mainly the biggest problematic of this. It'd be very easy to say, okay, we're going to define the common, or we're going to invent or construct the common, and it's just going to be these 15 people, and that is common, right? There's no scale to that. It doesn't scale between groups, and it doesn't cross boundaries also. So when we define what a common is here, there is a abstraction we must take. We have to assume it to be a totality in order to talk about it, right? But realize in the world is not a totality, right? This is one such boundary, but there is much more. There's more intention, and hopefully this, as we integrate over and over these concepts, they start to make sense. I promise. It's like reading. It's hopefully easier than reading Laurel, but it should be somewhat similar in the rhetoric on how it builds. So we have this idea of constructing the commons. I've already said X without a ground. And it's like, then as Anne-Françoise was pointing out, right, we have something about value, right? And we also have something about real. So this operation, this X is something that operates between our shared values and what is the common reality, right? And I'm going to skip the impossibility stuff for now. This is the practice, hopefully. By drawing specific attention to the times that we do confront the real, right? We expose our limitations to it. We never reach the real isn't impossible, right? But every time we do kind of play with it, it's sort of like it goes into this, it can kind of, it goes, I don't know, it's a terrible image, but say you have like a portal you're in front of and you can act in front of that portal, the portal then can return something kind of like a black box experiment, right? But the paradox is that at the moment that you are acting upon the black box, the feedback mechanism is already affecting you. So you can never be in the time that you access the real. It's terrible. I'm sorry, I should have thought of it better. I'll get better at this. These very limitations, right? Which has our structural limitations, our ability to management. We can, this is the mode of the fiction. We transpose these into fictions, right? We employ fictions so we can attempt to perceive the impossible. And these fictions go from the basic ones, like it's very famous. It comes up a lot in the Atlas Group stuff, but also in George Lucas' text and Rancière. But like the idea that you must fictionalize something in order to experience the real. We create a history in order to understand the real. Like everything is a fiction that gets closer and closer to the real, which is the irony of this, right? We want to extend this further and say that you can actually think of this even more abstract. And we have to think of this in a sense of vector, in that a fiction is a force and it's an operation. There are many ways we practice them and we can instill them, but it's a fiction is a literal escape from and a movement towards escaping boundary, the boundary of what we can know. So if we have this confrontation with the real, anytime we act with it, right? In this, we have an impossibility. And this is this is always the limitation and the explanation of the political significance and our present context and what our boundaries are. And of course I can speak to like the American craziness that's happening here, and everybody and kind of like and I probably will, to give examples, but I just want to say here that there are two things that we can distinguish. Two more slides. Two things that we can distinguish, right? There's politics and an ethics when we discuss these concepts, right? The politics is like the ability to fill that space, right? And it's never completed. We know this, right? This is the idea of like forming or constructing a utopia. But in the means of, you have this empty lack, and the political is to come in that space. Okay. Politics is super interesting. We'll talk about this a lot, right? But the thing that we want to contribute to, and we will spend more time contributing to, is because we're taking an orientational position, a research position, and trying to sort of build it. So it's, I think, ethical. We need to take the ethical considerations into our work, right? So we focus a lot. We want to focus a lot on ethics in this course, right? And we said that this is like the literal experience or the literal encounter of of an impossibility, which implies a limit. So it's almost like literally hitting the wall, and that experience is like that experience, because when it's collectively driven, can propel an ethical situation. We're gonna we define this as an orchestration of the commons, and this will make more sense because I don't know, we didn't ask, but I'm not sure how many people have read Laurel's last work on tetralogos. But we will introduce a few parts of this. It is magnum opus. And it's a treatise on music. So there's a lot of musical language for the noise musician here. Lots of understanding. We'll be talking a lot through like ideas of counterpoint, like Bachian counterpoint, orchestration, music, these sorts of things. And sorry, last slide before discussion.
Yes, I will add just if we have a confrontation without contradiction, and it is possible because we cut the relationship between philosophy and the real. In the classical philosophy, we reach the real practicing philosophy. And the result is the war between philosophies. So, as in non-standard philosophy, we put an X, indifferent to philosophy, to science, to technique, to computer, to etc., etc. But the hypothesis is this X precede the science, the philosophies, the painting, etc. So we can have a non-classical system of negation and opposition. So we can organize a lot of consequence of the commons. Joevenn insists on the collective. Tony on the temporal. I on the implantation axiom. So we can enrich our conceptions. And I think in the course, your consumption of all the students and your exercises will enrich this conception with your skills. You see, there are two things. We have a glossary, glossary very original and experimental. You will have this in the text, and you can enrich this glossary. You too, you can enrich this glossary. And we have 6 hypotheses for the work. The first is that language is never used in isolation, idem for color, for equations, etc. Hypothesis 2, interdisciplinarity is not only a consensus on the meaning of words. It's not a question of language, not only a question of language. 3, the common equal X requires an implanted axiom, as I said. 4, art, sciences, philosophies, etc. should not only be seen as languages, but also understood as operators or objects. These terms are in the glossary. 5, we can use each of our disciplinary knowledge as an operator or as a state. 6, we can construct matrices combining properties of these diverse disciplines to invent new postures. You will find these hypotheses, general hypotheses for the course in text. We will find so with the glossary.
Okay. Yes, the glossary is accessible on Classroom. I believe Joevenn also put it up there today. You can see it. I would stress the fact that this experimentality of the things that we create, we might give a form, or we start something in a certain form that we encourage that you contribute and change it, and we might not have the best way of doing things. That, you know, we've kind of done the glossary throughout each course, so it's been building as we go, and we're trying to find different ways of approaching it. So it's not just we will share it in a document, but this is not strictly, as she said, it's not strictly a language game. Any way we can figure out ways to add, you can add obviously other media. So we at least have audio-visual, but you know, we encourage you to do whatever, and we'll discuss that each time. Yes. Can we, if you're talking about the as the glossary, yes, the glossary can also, as is with everything we do, right? That there's no contradiction between glossaries. If somebody creates a new glossary, right, we would be able to use 2 simultaneously. Yeah, so it's very open, and the assemblage could be multiple multiple glossaries, or I can share with you, I've made some like sonic pieces that have been like responses to other courses and other theories. The last thing I really just wanted to say, I'm going to leave off for the next week, but this is like, we've beaten down now 3 different people and 3 different ways of speaking about this kind of idea. I wanted to say, I think I've caught one of the, I wasn't paying attention, but I caught one of the questions that was brought up, right? Which Maria asked. And she's asking that it seems that both impossibility and common imply the non-given, or is the impossibility given? It's absolutely a good question. Both the impossibility and the common are non-given. When we think that you'll find that we have this one thing, we have this issue between even the 3 of us, and every time we meet, and we're getting more and more closer to it. But it happens if you do the thought experiment and you try to discuss. If you think of something like I did with the thought experiment of common, and Francois also was saying that there are community, right, and collective were 2 examples. But if you can think of any sort of anything as your definition of common, right, and then if you think this out to its limit, to its boundary of an impossibility, right, there, like, you will. One second, rephrase. And every time you hold the idea of the common in your mind, I would argue that there's an easy way of thinking about this in terms of the impossible. They kind of play into each other a lot. So when we speak about the common, I am firmly giving it as an a priori, right? As giving it as just, it is impossible. But if you asked what that impossible is, you would then in turn have to define this based on also not like a non-given. There's no common is not a priori to impossible, right? So this is the thing. There is a distinguishing difference. The question of the impossibility that we will get to next week, that Anne-Françoise wanted me to mention as the last possible thing I can talk about, right, is that a lot of times we will use, and we have used in the past, the unknown as a concept. The last course we talked about was integrative objects, and the integrative objects is unknown object X.
Yes.
What is unknown to us, right, is what we can think of. There's limitations to what we can think, right, what we can understand. There's also limitations to what we physically can do. There's an ontological limitation. There's an epistemological limitation. So when we talk about this, in the past, usually when we talk about this, when people are speaking about impossibilities and possibilities, they're speaking about material conditions. And when you're speaking about what is unknown and known, this is more of an epistemological framework. We want to kind of organize to bridge the 2, I hope. And I will introduce this more in the next lecture.
Yes.
But this is a lot of us talking. There won't be this is always the first session is like a lot of us filling time. And now that I know all your backgrounds and have a lot of relations through a lot of you, the next session is going to be a lot more catered towards your personal interests. But can I ask a question just to get some people speaking and to respond? We have, I think, a lot of people whose projects they discussed have come to terms with this, maybe even if they haven't thought of this. But have you been dealing? Maria already gave a response with Utopia, which follows this form a lot. But what kinds of problematics in your work do you find a relation to this? Right, when you're finding either that there is an impossibility in your discipline, right, something that you just can't reach, or in your mind, you know, is not academic disciplines, whatever, but or the fact that maybe you're working on a grassroots project and you're or you're trying to build a collectivity and you're having problems dealing with how do you build this. I just want to hear from some people about, you know, if this has some personal, if we can find a personal relevance or resonance in some of your work, it would be nice to hear about it so we can return to it.
Yes. Have you suggestions after these presentations?
I just put it up as an open question. I mean, if anybody does, there's about 10 seconds, 12, that we're going to put of silence, awkward silence. And if nobody chimes in, we're going to move on to the next point that we have planned. But I would put this out to you now. Come in, and if you have anything that any of us said when we were rambling that had resonance, please, you know, contribute. So we have some feedback. It's easier with feedback, please, as well.
So my discipline is art history, and something that I can think about is the notion of aesthetic, how like aesthetics can be linked from the common or conventional notion of subjectivity. Mm-hmm. Like how we can think about aesthetic that is not human-centered. And then in that sense, what might be the relation between aesthetics and politics? Because if we want to link aesthetics from the subject, then how we can relate it to politics.
Mm-hmm. I think then that aesthetics has a lot of levels. And in certain sense, the aesthetics is very, very very, very primitive. If you, in the sense, if you have some data, some lived, etc., the first explanation is an inchoative aesthetics. I think it's very important. In general, we said that data talked from themselves. I think it's not true. We have an intermediary between data and concepts who requires aesthetics. It's one level. But there are levels more in relationships with disciplines, with practices. And the relationship between the inchoative aesthetics and the disciplines is very interesting because she transforms the sense. With the biologist Muriel Mombrini-Doudet and we construct an aesthetics epistemology because epistemology only is not sufficient to understand the manner of construction of sciences. So aesthetics is a primitive to construct other disciplines. I think I never learned English at school, only reading Russell. So it is very difficult to give exactly the nuance I will give. but with the course, all we and in aesthetics, with Ivan Ljovic-Ebel, who is here, during the lockdown, we decided to have a great experience. We wrote a text in 2 columns, 1 column philosophy, 1 column the writing of the painter, and with a core who don't give a rhythm of this structure. And it is an experience philosophical, aesthetical, epistemological at the same time. Even did you accept to put in the reserve our text on this event? Even week. Did you accept to that we give our book for the course?
I think your microphone is muted.
Sorry, my microphone was muted. Sorry. Yeah, of course. It will be a pleasure. Yeah.
It's an experience. It's an experience in the same time philosophical, aesthetic, and artistic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are, and it is a text we can give as an experience for the group.
Yeah, it would be very nice to see this. I would say, like, to add like some comment, my comments, thinking about it just off the top of my head. You have in Rancière, obviously, and in Foucault, that the aesthetics is what is sensible, what sensation, right? But it is what the aesthetic regime, blah blah blah, is what is the boundary between what's possible and impossible, of what can be sensed, but also what can be said. So it deals, in one sense, aesthetics is a primitive as well for Rancière. This is like the example, right? That it's a way for him to see the boundaries of possible and impossible, right? I'm trying to example from what you said that you use aesthetics as a primitive, but also you can see it to respond to your data as well. I'm thinking of problematics that they have, biases in data require an aesthetic measurement to an ethical measurement. I think both also linked to the ethical when we're describing this experience of limits. But these data, they need an aesthetic element, because the pure logical driver, or just the idea of a bunch of people like me, a bunch of 20, 30 white dudes creating data is dangerous. It's not fair, and it might not even be an internal intention. But we know this from like what recently just happened with the largest data set used, is that it was biased. It was racially biased based on it, and this is only made visible through an aesthetic project, right? It has to be made visible to people because it's the first time actually in history that that you have Microsoft and Stanford actually like removing a data set from, one of the largest been since, I think, like started early 90s or Envision, right? Finally, after last year, through an aesthetic art, through Harvey in Berlin, he basically was able to show this, and actually was like, they made a move and had to remove it. So there, and also there are a lot of ways, like one last thing is like modeling data itself exhibits multiple universes and multiple possible worlds. It's like the action on the data. It's the way you read it, the way you structure it, the way you even pull from it, all creates possibilities. So they're like, aesthetics is, I mean, extremely very useful when you're designing these things, to know its shape, to know the shape of data, to know how the flows of data, you know, you only know this through practicing, through going through it.
Agree.
Otherwise you're gonna end, you know, you have a lot of crappy, you know, AI run amok. But yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody else have any comments, maybe questions, thoughts? We're talking about I would say datum is like the general sense, but I think since the question here is, when we're referring to data, what are we talking about? Like net data, like computational data, I think you mean by net data, and data is a philosophical, yeah, it's a scientific and philosophical, I think. Data would, I think since Whitehead probably, data is both computational and datum. So there, yeah, we would discuss any grouping of points of empirical pragmatic points, I guess. Data, anything can be collected, not necessarily observed at the moment that it's collected. But are there any other questions?
Seems like the datum is like the pure given.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
because
philosophically,
you're collecting it, yeah.
Yes, I mean, when you deal with the engineering, when you deal with the engineering practical aspect of it, there's a few steps you have to take before you can get into into that. Data are not facts. Facts are the relationship with one theory, not data. Yeah, we know this very well.
Yes.
I mean, how many examples do you want to give? Let's just go, I mean, just say COVID-19 data.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at all of the facts going from there. And, you know, I mean, and it runs very close to conspiracy theory too, because number, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, that's one of the big issues, right? Maria, she says, she's saying like that's nobody trusts science, right? And like, I think this is one of the things that we were discussing, is this like old idea that there is like one dominant discipline that everybody can look to and has all of our information, right? And we still want to act this way. We still want to act this way and say that like, oh, we're going to look to science, and science is our dominion, and it's going to give us, and it works, and it tries to work experimentally. Maybe, you know, I think we have a different, you know, groups that are formed, right? But you see how science can't communicate to the common people. I mean, it's just impossible. Yes, we have to extend epistemology, and by extending, we also are grounding and taking it down. We're under that's the generic element of it.
Yes.
And I think to speak to the one last thing, the non-human framing, right? When we're discussing the generic, this is it within the non-human framing. If you're gonna, you can just, you know, to make something generic is also to make something like it could be, it also underdetermines the human, right? Because you can expound this to being generic. The generic has to relate to inanimate objects. That has to, you know, there are different avenues. Any other questions, or like, hey, this really this made no sense, or, you know, I said something wrong, or... anything.
So this might be a bit of a strange question, or well, maybe it won't make sense, but let me ask. So if we take as our sort of point of departure, a sort of the commons equals X as an empty form, what else do we presuppose in that sort of such that sort of what is necessary in order for us to be able to sort of posit this empty form of the commons, and who can sort of participate in doing something like that?
Yeah, and I think great question, super great, because we're thinking that we do communicate this, and obviously we have to go back to, but we discuss when we're saying specifically in the language of primitives, the primitives are going to be the things that we're going to be able to take with us to this, that we can, nothing is to be predisposed, but only a fidelity to a methodology, right? So we will either, and the glossary is another one. When you read the glossary, it's going to bring in the different aspects, and also the like the operators. So the operators have been, and they're also invented, so they might change, and they might be new. There might be new ones, especially one that we've been dealing with a lot, that we have no, that we haven't like completely solidified, is this question of aesthetics. Alice Rakab and Anne-Françoise Schmid have done a lot in this, but we have operators like fiction and future. We did the future last session. So now impossibility is becoming another operator, and the common being one of our primitives that we wanted to define. So yes, there will be, and it's a toolbox that is open. There's a lot of room. Some say infinite amount of room. So
I can
yeah, please.
I can talk a little more about so I'll give a little short presentation, about 10 minutes, and then we can go on a 10-minute break after that. But so what I'm going to talk about is, for instance, the problem of the collective, and especially what the collective, how it figures in philosophy. So first and foremost, we as in the three of us, and I think all of us in this class would have to, and so we presume a collective hypothesis. And it's that in collectivity, we have a solution to problems that we believe cannot be resolved individually. In other words, we treat collectivity as a necessary implement to problems that cannot be individually resolved. In this sense, the problem of collectivity is we treat it as a philosophical problem. How as philosophers, I am a philosopher, so how as philosophers can we think of collectivity as having a rich solution to these problems, to these non-individuated resolved problems? This is a somewhat strange type of philosophical inquiry, because the problem of the collective has never really been a philosophical problem. And I'll elaborate what I mean by this. So let me give an example. So in philosophy, I'm speaking in absolutely general terms, is a kind of caricature. In philosophy, when we come across a problem that we cannot entirely understand yet, we try to peer into the foundations of that problem by questioning its workings, its foundational suppositions, its foundations, how it's constituted, etc. This ability to question the foundations of our problematics is a philosophical strategy deployed time and time again. And this comes as a huge part of the problem of philosophical skepticism. So philosophical skepticism raises problems about the ground, or whatever it is that we have doubts on. And this doubt bleeds into the premise of one's entire enterprise of philosophically reconstructing our problems, etc., etc. So such a problem of skepticism is something that is uniquely philosophical. It is uniquely philosophical because it's only in philosophy that we can doubt the ground that we walk on, a type of like individuated ground that we presume can be replaced by something other, If I can presume I can replace this ground by a different foundation, etc. So there's a plethora of examples that different philosophers try to seek different foundations for thinking, for their practice. And these philosophers believe that if we have a new ground to walk on, some people seek an epistemic ground. I think the person who's in Wisconsin was talking about trying to have an aesthetic that's based on a different type of object or something. So there are plethora of examples that different philosophers try to seek different foundations for thinking and practice. And these philosophers believe that if we have a new ground to walk on, we can, for example, attain a new cognitive encoding of the world, for instance. And for people who think like this, for thinkers, who think like this, their foundation that they presume is always individuated, grounded on an account of the selfhood that they presume to be biunivocally functional for the world. So I want to give another example that is in contrast, a different example that is in contrast with the philosophical example. So let's say in mathematics. In mathematics, if a mathematician finds a theorem unsatisfactory, they would search for proofs that embolden their intuition in order to put the theorem into an appropriate form of questioning. Their language is often like, is this a well-posed question? Is this a nice but beautifully posed question, etc. So so in that sense, a mathematician is unable to participate in a quote-unquote wholesale skepticism of the foundations that they partake in. Let's say that if a mathematician is fully skeptical about the grounds of their problematic, then the mathematician is encountering a philosophical problem. So the mathematician is having a philosophical crisis, not a mathematical crisis, if it's posed in a question of like wholesale skepticism, for instance. So now, when we talk about the collective in a philosophical lens, we are actually talking about the collective as a philosophical problematic that is hinged on mathematical and scientific premises. For instance, in the way in which the task of understanding a collective doesn't really exist in philosophy except through particular lineages. But what we are trying to say is that we can in fact substitute, we can in fact change these very premises with mathematical premises or scientific premises, such that they instill new rules, they instill new rigors by ways in which the philosophical problematic is unable to grapple with, unable to tarry with, simply because of its ways of historical practices, for instance, and in its content, for instance. So in that, so to go back to like Carl's question, what else, if anything, does the commitment to something like the common form, the common equal sex imply or presuppose? There are many reasons to, there are many presuppositions that take this commitment, but one of them could be, as Anne-Françoise and Tony have been saying, the impossible, the commitment to the fact that there are truths beyond our particular localized field of knowledge, that in fact content extends beyond our own localized regions of epistemic founding, for instance. And another commitment could be that a commitment of collectivity could come from the commitment of wanting to, this is like, it can be very straightforward, the commitment of trying to figure out how environmental values are just as important to capitalist values. If capitalist values are the only way in which, for instance, we can found a society, when usually capitalist society values exclude environmental values. So people who are interested in, for example, reconciling epistemic environmental values with capitalist values do recognize the necessary pathways that they need to get out by which of that. Going down.
Yeah, there are some questions that you should you can answer to.
Yeah. Are there any? Yeah, I'm sure to look at the question. In what sense is it only philosophy that can doubt its own ground? or rather what in this act is uniquely philosophical? I suppose maybe
we kind of answered this one, yeah.
Right, sorry. Yeah, I mean, so I do think that there are many different types of gestures that are imminent to the practice of a particular discipline or domain. And these gestures, so for example, in mathematics, the gestures that they practice in order to perform what they're supposed to do and acquire the type of like content that they are interested in is something that's not the same as what I presume philosophers are doing. Obviously, that's not entirely true because a huge part of, you know, the interest in logic is to bring mathematics into the logical fold, etc. But the fact that I'm saying is that there are many, the fact that there are different disciplines mean that there are different gestures of operations, there are different operative procedures. And if there are different operative procedures, these different operative procedures have their own content of practice. And the presupposition is that we can try to figure out how to attune them in different ways to see quote unquote blind spots. This is not accurate. I mean, it's not entirely accurate, but to see blind spots in each other's work or to construct a body of, a new body of like axiomatic practice.
Yeah, to expand the logic of our worldviews.
So in the sense that, exactly. So in the sense that if Tony is an artist or an engineer and I am a philosopher and someone who is an art historian, what does it mean to expand the very body of our own practice beyond our own disciplinary domain? So how can I practice philosophy in a space that Tony is also practicing art? And all of this is done with rigor, you know, and that's the hope. Like you don't want to just do like a art performance theater thing. Like we're talking about, like, we hope for rigor.
There are very rigorous art performance theater things. Just to, sorry.
No,
but
yeah,
I understand what you were saying. That frame, sure.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, rigor in there are many different types of rigor when it comes to different disciplinary aspects. Yeah.
I guess another question for everybody, if somebody might want to respond, including my colleagues. I probably should actually put myself back in here. Sorry. I'm cheating. I'm using my own production. Okay, so the other question, just like the question to expand is, can anybody else present a nuanced idea of what common, or how they understand the common? You don't have to give a definition. Common is this, but you could, like just in the example that we gave when we talked about, we're talking about really easily relatable ones like community and collectivity, you know, but there are other versions of common. Anybody want to add any? We still have more to do. If not, we do. I don't know. I'm not sure how New Center does it anymore. But we'd like to take like a 10-minute break. It's very nice to just kind of step away. And I hope that's okay with our moderator here.
Yeah, totally fine.
Okay. Cool.
Should we maybe leave the question open, take
a
5-minute break, and then come back to it?
Perfect. Yeah,
should we do 10-2? Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, sounds good. For me, it's good. Yeah, so just think about how you might relate to this idea, what you can add to the understanding of the common or impossible. You could talk about the impossible too. And then we can have that final discussion. Thanks. Your picture is great.
I think in interdisciplinary work, the trouble replaces the doubt.
I'm sorry, one second.
The doubt is mono-disciplinary.
The what? The doubt?
The doubt.
Doubt.
Yeah.
Is mono-disciplinary.
D'accord.
In interdisciplinary regime of science and philosophies, if we take seriously the multiplicity of right of philosophies, there are trouble, not doubts.
Yeah, there's, I mean, we could also call that like that's like the confrontation and the delta no.
Yes, yes.
Is like doubt, is a doubt that's dispersible, right? But it's like not one that's cast over.
Yes.
If that makes sense, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna step away for a moment.
As between actors in a piece of theater.
Or an orchestration.
Between them. 10 minutes break. Very good. Minutes break.
if everybody just comes like back on video when the majority of people come back, we can just start. It's just an easy check-in. Okay, we can just begin again. So we can, I want to just respond. We had a question in the group. Maybe it's been communicated about.
Oh yeah, I had a question, but I can also give. I have like two fleeting thoughts about the commons.
Okay, great,
Thank you.
perfect.
Just thinking about like, so first thought is there seems to be like when you're making the comment in X, there seems to be like maybe an ethical like decision to turn off the lights in the room or something, like so that there's a kind of an unlearning or stepping away from one's like dominant domain and a kind of humility that's practiced within a group setting. So that, like you said, there's an equality between disciplines. And then the second one is also, I think of the comments as a kind of like posture or an assumption that we make. Like we don't know, like not knowing whether there really is a commons, not being able to confirm, but like acting as if there is. So it's a kind of a commitment in the second sense. That's what I think of it as.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think that like commenting in a sense is like one of the things you might have been talking about in the first sense as well, or even adding to it as a response, like the act of commenting, the things you have to kind of take on. We do have, yeah, there's a lot of things that you also spoke to that we kind of practice or we continue to work on, right? And that's like you'll hear about like things of fidelity, like there's a fidelity to this practice, right? And there's like the fidelity or the kind of like the way that we offer ourselves to constructing the commons, right, is important. That's why we're going to talk a lot about methodology and ways of doing that.
I was thinking about what was said about data and data and how this molecule could be like a transdiscipline, not only between disciplines, but between like, I don't know, beings, like things that are inanimate or things that are cosmological, that has a certain like code and fractal that's completely otherly than like our own human. And I was thinking that as a like data as a cosmological common somehow, like information being organized in patterns that create phenomena, be it like, I don't know, like a supernova or this conversation or like a biological sphere too, I don't know.
I mean, just to really quickly, I guess, I'm going to let my other colleagues answer after, but I really want to answer this last one. Because like, yeah, I think data as a common probably gets confused in our work, but really like data in our, let me just rephrase it a little bit and see if how it works. But like data as like the primitive, you're like data has to, you know, data doesn't exist as a general common. It is like, I guess it is in its sense, it's like it's complete abstract form. But think of the ways in which data operates to form a common, right? And that's the level that that is really interesting, I think, to interrogate. Like a specific, you can start to experiment with different ways that data operates, and which one becomes of interest to you. Because everybody's going, of course, that in itself has a huge, you know, domain, and it might be very specific in its point. But yeah, I think what you're saying is really interesting. And there was a comment about this similar thing about in the group with algorithms. Find it.
But I don't mean like data only, computational data, but like information, like
okay, yes.
More of a apps, like, and how, for example, on a leaf forming, it's like patterns, like there is a certain
perfect
like information that is codified somehow, that it's not, I mean, through science could see it, but I don't know. And like this could happen in so many phenomenons, you know, yeah, I don't know.
In your when you just rephrased it back to me, yeah, I agree with what you were saying. I could think, yes, I spoke specifically of in like a data operation, but like in the way you just gave that example, that was what I was, you know, prompting you to do, everybody to do. You know, you found an image, you can then start to interrogate the concepts that we're proposing, right? To see if they make sense, right? Where's the limits to what we've now presented to you of this idea of common, right? In any example that you might be able to think of. This is just a practical way of starting to think about how to do it. And then see where you hit limits and trying to approach your idea. Because it would be interesting. Like where you find problematics in how we're discussing common. In, for instance, you gave this example of information, right? So if you're playing through, thinking through information, like you gave the example of the leaf, then start to expand. Maybe I would suggest maybe look into the glossary and see if any of these things breaks. And then I would be really interested to hear about these things too. Sorry. I'm backing up now because I'm taking up too much time of the three of us. So Joevenn and Anne-Françoise, please take over moderating, or thank you.
Okay, do you guys have the link to the Google Classroom? I think there should be this. I put it on the chat. Let me know if anybody is unable to access the thing.
Just to quickly respond to Maria's question, oh no, it's to Anne-Françoise. She's going to answer in the no, she'll answer in a response, I think, in chat.
Okay.
So I have a question that I believe that it would add to the question of Maria. I was watching Anne-Françoise talk on the triptychs of non-philosophy, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the third triptych that she presents, there is generic, the philosophy, and the quantic. And in the generic fields, there is melody and syntax. The question that came to my mind was, well, isn't the melody already structured by a given syntax? Isn't it somehow previous to, posterior to the formulation of a syntax? And another question was about the concept of invention as a superposition of voices, and the voice is identified with this transcendental dimension. And I believe that it wasn't very clear for me to understand how the voice relates to the transcendental. It reminds me of Agamben in Infancy and History, in the concepts of experimentum linguae that he conceptualizes. But yeah, I believe that pretty much so.
Anne-Françoise, Joevenn actually summarizes very good on the chat to the questions.
Yes. Yes. For the first question, Tetralogos, the last book of Laruelle, is an attempt to transform philosophy in music. It was a posture very old by Laruelle. The question of musical composition is fundamental, but he thinks with philosophy is not. He thinks with only philosophy it's not possible. So he creates a cluster with philosophy, generic, who generic can use all philosophies. It's not a war between philosophies, au contraire. And with quantic, because quantic is not a science about the natural objects. Quantic is on states and operators. And he used concepts of quantic because it's not a naturalization of conception. And with generic philosophy and quantic, he construct a set who he call reminiscence, not reminiscence as in Plato, not science only, but reminiscence, science. And E is the imaginary number 2. So this set permits to change of levels. Level of the cavern, level of the world, level of the universe. And it is possible for the variable individuals, they are variables, to live the difference between world and universe. And this construction can explain not only the death, as all philosophies, but the birth, the respiration, the voice. And the melody is the first step of the voice. And when there are a lot of voices, there is invention in the sense of Jean-Sébastien Bach. Invention is the superposition of voices. It's the definition of invention in music, superposition of voices. And with this group on common equal X, we can construct this cantata. And so the transcendental dimension, yes, is a philosophical problem. When philosophy is enriched with quantic and generic, the notion of transcendental is generalized as a definition, as a necessary definition to distinct the empirical as multiple, as the one, as a principle of interpretation. I can put the text on tetralogos, opus and opera in the box. I explain the relationship between the triptychs in the tetralogos.
And I think really just this one addition from a different book, Laurel's, but when he's talking about the mysticism,
yes,
he's very, when he's talking about like what contemporary philosophy should be, it was like almost a manifesto for where the future of philosophy should be, and he's describing the power of formalism. So there is like to answer to this syntactical question, right? Because syntax, you have like syntax in itself is an order or a structure, right? But also there's rules that order that structure. There's a structure itself, and then there's a structuring of the structure. Does this make sense? The thing is, when you answer, I think to particularly answer the question, what level is the discussion happening? I think is happening in like the rules themselves are not given ahead of time, so there's no a priori or rules that structure syntax, right? But it's in the practice of it. So I think it is in like the level of the ways in which things are put together, concatenated, constructed, ordered, right? And so the melody is not to think of like what intuitively or presupposes or orders the melody. It's how the melody, which melodies operate or which melodies form in such a way, right? And which ways bring us closer to, I think. This is my way of answering just the syntax problem, but.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
We can develop this question in another sense.
Yeah, and that other sense is the fact that when I think this is a response I think to also Anne-Françoise, because when she's giving this example, she's presupposing the musical domain, right? And in the way that she speaks, she's inventing the way that she's inventing her like her concepts. She's inventing in the response that she's giving, right? Which translates and transforms every single time that Anne-Françoise will respond. Every time the concepts are transformed.
Yes.
So it's like it's understanding over time, or even in like the prompting, I think, of doing this with her. For her, I think that's like, am I correct here? Like that this is true, right? That's every time you would answer, I should have typed, but it's sorry. Okay. I will move on from that. Does anybody else have a question? Joevenn, do you have a response or that I have taken up from your time?
No. I think we can go to what time does the class end, by the
way? We're pretty much in like 15-minute left zone, so we're at closing, wrapping up. I think
there's this, yeah, so I'm trying to send, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think we just move the book exercise to a reading, and we discuss it next week.
I think it sounds fine, yeah.
I think rather we kind of wrap with any other, this is my suggestion in real time, I'm sorry, but we wrap with more, like anybody else that wants to contribute. We also had more questions in the side, and it will take us 10 minutes just to talk about what we want to do next week. So I think we're wrapping, right? Yeah. And is there anyone have any, we're gonna copy the group chat and we'll respond to all the questions over the week. This conversation never ends. This is probably the most tormenting part of the conversation, but it's real. If we can get you all like involved, active, we are people that really just love doing this. We love having group conversations, and we do engage. I don't want to be like force. I don't want to force anybody in this group to do anything that they don't want to do. But if you keep up during the week, we're not somebody who just comes here on Sundays. We love to talk, and we'll
there are some thoughts that I'd like to share about commons still about this concept. There are something that came to my head that like when something is not common for you, it's unfamiliar, you know, and there is this process of becoming common. And I just reminded of some images that like the foreigner, the strange, and they somehow are related to the unknown, with unknown powers, etc. And I was thinking like some images, how is this process? Things become common, but actually how is this ethics of leading with the unknown, you know? So you assume actually that something is common, but also there might be unknown powers inside the common. And there are just some ethics in this, I think, in this relationship, if they don't know indeed.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the way that you framed that. I just want to say before, I think Anne-Françoise has a response maybe, but I would say like post image. If you're thinking in images, you can post in images. Think of that. You don't like, you know, if you can, you know, I think you're that's just a response. I don't know if it's physically images or you're speaking about an image like the stranger, which is like
images can be like in a wide sense. I was thinking like, for example, the foreigner, he went into places that you don't know what is his past, so he might know secrets, he might have secrets, and everything might have a secret. So it's difficult to assume that things are common sometimes.
Okay, great.
But I don't know, it's a constant process of stability, I guess.
Welcome to this class.
Yeah.
Anne-Françoise, would you like to say, before we talk about next week, would you like to say any conclusion for today? Last remarks?
We have prepared an exercise and a matrix. The matrix is constituted by the values and the comments and the common equal x, common without x, impossible as limit and impossible as radical with our values. And we think in my matrix is contingent, is one possibility of matrix. I will give you this matrix, and I think it is interesting to see why you construct this matrix with the same terms. The matrix is not only two-dimensional, because when we invent the language to cross the values and the comments equal x, comments without x, impossible as limit or as radical, we have to invent a new term with our skills. And after this exercise, we have the possibilities to have a new network of terms for the conversation. I will give an attention to one word. It's important that all persons intervene and explain, but we do not accept that the course are only conversations, because the notion fundamental are no more used. So we will work on matrices to have our network of terms. I will. Can you partage this matrix, Tony or Joevenn?
I can't. I don't have it. Joevenn's.
I've uploaded it on Google Classrooms, but I don't think that everybody has access to it, which is what. Is there anybody that cannot access the Google Classrooms? I can't upload it on the chat, which is annoying.
I think if people cannot access it, we can send out to everybody's email. They have your emails because you all got links today. So what I think I can try to also like say from my perspective, what Anne-Françoise was just saying as well. There's the matrix is like one way of it's not just these conversations, not just these ways that we're using words and definitions and concepts, but this example that we're presenting, I'm trying to describe in words, is just a new way of communication that if we can all we could practice it, right? And it's a language of, it's just, I mean, let's talk, I mean, for the spatial, for Carl, right? It will be like very spatially, like diagrammatically and spatially relational, I'm sure, like, right? When you think of a matrice, and you think of not only that, every one of our relations is a new dimension to the, you know, so there are ways, but anyways, the matrix is, so there are different ways of communicating. The matrix is the contingent example she's giving, meaning that this is one way of doing it, and this is one language we found that is enabling, but not the only one. And there may be things that are added to it. The glossary is another version of this that you should look at. And the exercise comes from the book that Anne-Françoise Schmid showed in the beginning, of course. Those things are the three things I think that are useful to like look at for the next week. But I'm trying to transit because we have 5 minutes, but just I asked Joevenn to help me, but we have
so I just sent. Sorry.
Oh, we have readings for next week. We try not to pick gigantic readings, right? But we do love to recommend readings, so there probably are going to be a lot of like recommended and assigned, you know, but there's one that we really would like everybody to sort of commit to trying to read. It will make it better for everybody because it won't be just one person discussing the idea. Because the reading itself, we will take right off the bat next week and just have a discussion around.
The common is not only abstract. You have used your skills and your preference to construct the common with techniques.
Yes.
To respect the collective and the temporal.
And in this way, in this like experimental way, it's a lot like each one of these boxes is its own island of a common, and we're going to attempt to draw lines between, I don't know if you're looking at this box view, the view of everybody, that I'm looking at the everybody Zoom version, not the speaker one, but you know, it's drawing lines between these and connecting and finding each one invents another one that might be closer to someone else. And we're going to navigate these different spaces. So anyways, in the classroom, there will be like a message from us talking about what we should prepare for next week. And I think also there should be space for every one of you to present a project in the context of the course. Like I, for one, would much rather have you speaking as well. So if anybody, the first week, we'll just do a volunteer. Somebody can, I'll make a thread and somebody can just say they want to do it. First come, and we can discuss how that works later. We can build a more formal way of having everybody discussing and continually discussing the project. So not just, you don't just present it once, but you can keep coming back to it. You know, this course is in a way built so we can have, so it is like everybody is coming and discussing their project, and that's what we're doing every day. It's less the structured talk, lectures, although we prepare some things. Are there any questions or anything I missed from my, no? I guess we will try to present as many different examples that we have tried, diagrammatic, visual, just to show you, like, to hopefully get people into being very comfortable with doing their work, like not forming it. We're not. Hopefully, we build an aesthetic in some collective form, but you're doing your work. Like, I think that's what Anne-Françoise was talking about when she was the perspective, and like using the skills that you have.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Music,
so literally,
writing, geography, etc.
Yeah.
Because
respond with a noise track, please.
Because community is not only abstract; it's too concrete.
And also, we encourage you to collaborate with everybody else too. If you don't want to work in, you want to. There's a lot of people with a lot of really cool perspectives in this. I'm excited to try to work with a bunch of you too. And if you find somebody else is talking about something interesting, you know, work with them. It's not about being like only submitting individual things. Those are the things I'm just trying to encourage ahead of time.
And there's a glossary that I've included, that we have included with the email that Martina was sent to everybody. The glossary is like a living platform for the terms that we use, either inside or outside of class. And so feel free to take a look at it and add to it. Hopefully, by when we transmute the terms, stuff like that.
Okay. I know we started a little late, but it's right on time, I think.
So just to interject, I think I'll send an email you just sent over to me to everyone else. Please let me know, reach out anytime if someone doesn't receive it, if you have issues with the classroom, stuff like that. And I think I will also circulate a spreadsheet about presentations and responses. And obviously we can be with it kind of as formal or as informal as we like. And maybe it's a bit early for people to know whether they feel like presenting and responding next week. If there is anyone that feels that they want to now, please let me know. Otherwise, we can decide over email as well, and you can just fill the spreadsheet. But yeah,
there's no. I would say that each week there's no like specific way of presenting as well. So if you're like eager to talk about your project now, or you want to present an idea, it'll work. We will form it into the course. That should be the way we do it. I mean, that's so, but thank you very much. The spreadsheet will help just because I think having that structure is simple. So thank you.
I think Carl is being quite brave and deciding to go first. If there is anyone else that feels as inclined, do let us know. And as I said, if you're not 100% sure now, you can still decide in a couple of days. Otherwise, we'll have to roll the dice.
It's good language for this course.
Any closing remarks, guys?
Thank you. I appreciate all of you.
All. Thanks to you, Martina.
No worries. Thanks to you guys. It's a pleasure. And everyone have a lovely rest of the day.
Morning, night, things like this. Yeah.
Yes.
All things.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye, guys. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.